So, thanks for that announcement. I'm very happy to be here today to talk to you, indeed, about how to get started on Monday, or where to start on Monday. So, yeah, is it working? So, it is working. I just wanted to grab your attention, but I think this joke went well in rehearsal, but not here. I guess I got Matthias's attention. We're going to be talking about putting it all together and where to get started on Monday. So that's a simple question, but the question is, does it also have a simple answer? And I think not, because complex problems, they have simple, easy to understand, wrong answers. So if there's anything that if there would only be one thing that you would take away from this presentation, then it's really that try to take all of this, what you've learned today, all of these guiding principles from domain-driven design, and look at what is happening in your environment and sense, okay, these things I want to give a try, and then you try them, and you learn from that. But don't think there's any easy answer or any one particular answer. So I want to ask you to just join me for one moment. Grab whatever you took for note-taking or your phone, and just take 1 minute to list 3 things that would keep you from putting some of what you've learned today to work on Monday. So just take 1 minute and make a list of these 3 items. So, whatever you wrote down, usually it circles back to complexity. And complexity just happens to be the second title of the great book that spawned it all, Domain-Driven Design by Eric Evans. And the subtitle is Tackling Complexity in the Heart of Software. And when Eric Evans talks about this in the book, he's talking about the complexity that is inherent to be found in any domain, whatever it is, online ticketing, arrival and departure times for airports, or a payment service provider, or whatever you are working on, whatever next best thing. And then the second thing, which you've heard a lot also about today, is technology. Technology is inherently complex, and if these 2 things overlap, then projects can get very complex themselves. One of the things that our previous speaker talked about, and also Anita before, is the people aspect. It's something that is not necessarily explicitly mentioned in the book, but it's something that complicates what we're doing in terms of design on a day-to-day basis. So the fundamental premise that you've heard about today from domain-driven design is what we want to do is we want to make the domain the primary focus of every activity in our process. So we want to ignore the technical and ignore the non-essential as long as possible so that we can really delve into the difficulty of that blue bubble that I just showed you, which mimicked the domain that we're active in. And if the domain should be the primary focus of what we're doing, then we must learn continuously. And we can do that individually. We've talked about knowledge crunching earlier today. We can read domain Bibles, etc. But it's also an activity that we need to do collectively. The mighty domain experts, they could be people that have an academic degree maybe in the field, or there are predecessors that built a legacy system, or someone working in our organization, or you, because you know something as well about what you're doing. But the most common pitfall why projects fail when they try and start to put all of this stuff to work is that they have no expert. So what this talk is really going to be is making a to-do list. And one of the things that I hope you will put on there today is be like our little detective here, and on Monday, go out and find at least 3 domain experts that you don't know yet, with whom you're not in contact. Because we can only start to cultivate the ubiquitous language, which we talked about before, if we are talking to people with an understanding of what we're doing. And if we found them, what are we going to do? Well, we've talked about this today. We're going to model. We're going to use whiteboards, papers, sticky notes, lots of them. And we're going to work on diagrams and perhaps stories. As Kenny told us, maybe we can think in terms of the stories that we're trying to solve, but also, what are the examples that we can throw at this? And none of this is really about using that particular tool. It is not about the way we structure the diagram. It is not about the map that we're making. It is not about how many orange sticky notes we put up there. And it's not about these examples. It is all about the ideas we're trying to convey. The understanding of what is going on and why. So, and obviously also the mapping and the event storming. This was actually not that much, by the way. So here you see it. 80 meters is really can be a lower bound. So whatever you do, it's really about the idea behind the format. And one of the pitfalls that you see is, okay, we're doing all of this modeling in a project, and we get excited, but we also see that we're not covering everything that we had in mind. So what could happen is that we endlessly stand in front of this whiteboard, or that we keep on looking at the diagrams that we've made, and we think, well, there's this other case that won't work yet. But let's not fall into that trap, and let's start designing. And getting started with designing, that is where some of the technical patterns that are in this book can be very helpful if you're new to DDD. But what we should be aware of is that they are a starting point. The list of technical patterns that is in this book is something that was very valuable at the time of writing, but we're 15 years further, so maybe there is new patterns to be had that can help us. And when we're doing all of this designing and we're doing all of this modeling together with people, what we want to do is we want to embrace change, because that says something about the learning that we're doing. So rather than being too attached to the first idea that we had, let's, create an idea, model it, bring it to a design level where it's, implemented, where we've bound the model to the implementation, and then learn from it. And then whatever comes out of there, we're taking it back into our redesign process, where we keep on, evolving what we're doing. So far, what do we need to do on Monday? We need to go out there and we need to think about who the domain experts are in what we're trying to do. And with them, we need to talk about what it is that we're trying to achieve here. What is the goal that is valuable for this organization? And we need to think about how we can achieve that with an initial design. And then, when we get started, we continuously need to pay attention to both the technical patterns and the strategic design of what we're starting to create. Because, if any of these two are only attended to, at a particular stage in the project, we'll end up with the complexity that we try to prevent in the beginning. So, excuse me. At this point, we have a design, and that design is captured in language, and that allows us to talk with domain experts and to have a conversation about what we're doing and why we're doing it. But that also allows the domain expert to really contribute back to the designs that we have in place. And why is that? That is because we have bound the model to our implementation. This is why this is so critical. So it doesn't make sense to invest all this time in the mythical, ubiquitous language that is out there somewhere waiting for us, that we have to shape together with domain experts, if we're not binding them back to code. Because if we don't do that, we will lose the opportunity of our domain expert walking in on a particular Monday morning saying, I had this marvelous idea this morning when I was under the shower. If only when a customer removes an item shortly before placing a purchase, maybe the next time they visit our store, we should offer them a competing product with a discounted rate. Who knows? If those concepts are not part of our model, if they're part of our model, but they're not part of our design, then we will not be able to utilize the way this domain expert has just explained the problem to us. We cannot recycle the concepts that are in our domain and enhance them with the new terms and expressions that we've learned about. So on Monday, don't just think about, we need to talk to domain experts, but think about, okay, when we see that the model is changing and evolving, are we paying enough attention to have the implementation follow suit? Are we making sure that we are using appropriate patterns to implement this stuff in code so that when that moment arrives and the domain expert presents themselves with this marvelous idea, that we can actually immediately capture that value? So, if we have stuff in place, then we need to change, right? And what we want is big breakthroughs. That's happening right there. This is also taken from the book. And when can that happen? Well, all of these little changes and nuances in the model that happen, they can accumulate to such an extent that all of a sudden we see how we can take not a small step forward, but a huge leap. Now, sometimes that's the result of us doing gradual refactoring, but we can obviously also provoke that. So rather than thinking, okay, we always need an opportunity to present itself by handing it to the domain experts, we, as people working on the code, can also provoke that a bit by taking the time to refactor little bits and pieces here and there, and take that information out of that, feed that back to the domain expert so that we not only keep the model bound to the implementation, but the other way around as well. And then, at some point, an opportunity might and likely will present itself. And what do we do then if that happens? We don't let it go. We engage it. Because if we don't, then our thinking will be further, will be on a different model than the implementation, and there we will have the gap again that we worked so hard on to prevent. And in order to do this, we need to have tools that help us do this, right? So make sure that your team really uses, technology that allows refactoring to be smooth and seamless. Make sure that you have proper continuous integration to do all of this stuff so that we can change our minds easily. So, I put this picture in here because, one thing, sometimes we just need to experiment and play around a bit with things like young kids, but also because at some point things might have gotten messier than we wanted. It's too bad that there isn't a second picture of this kid crying with that everything is really brown. But that might happen, right? And that is okay. We've heard today about how we could deal with that, how we could carve off, again, responsibilities, put them in their own subdomains, so that we go back from brown colors to, the pigments that originated them. But the key here is that we want to experiment, we want to reflect on what we're doing, and then we want to evaluate. So whenever we're doing modeling, it's not just, what are we modeling? It is also, what are the effects that we are intending to achieve? And then if we have done something, that we keep on looking at the results that we're producing. Are we really provoking the change that we want to see? If we don't do that, then we're missing out on, the value that we aimed to create. And maybe we see that there's failure or success, and every time we see that, there's an opportunity to learn. Every mismatch in the model with the reality that we encounter is an opportunity to look at what we're missing. Maybe it's a missing concept. Maybe there are emergent boundaries. Maybe we thought it was a good idea to have an accounting bounded context, but along the way we see that things are a bit more subtle than that. And that is okay, because now we can intentionally start to look at how we can shift boundaries around so that they're more aligned with the problem that we're trying to solve and the socio-technical aspects that we've heard about before. Maybe there is conceptual contours of our domain emerging. So the natural, flexible points in the domain that we're active in. And whatever we're doing, we want to keep looking at how we're modeling and how we're constrained by the choices that we've made in how we've structured our models, to see if they aren't inhibiting us from making the changes that would be more helpful. And Eric Evans calls this the process of evolving order, but it's really like being very sensitive to changes in your environment and keep on looking at how they affect the way we're doing the work. But beware of overstructuring. And we're not going to do all of that for the sheer sake of it. We're not going to sit down and say, these are the technical patterns that will enforce more rigidity. No, we want to do that because we have some essential learning and because it will make things easier, because otherwise, why bother? And the goal is still to get to the core of what we're trying to do. And we want to make our core domain stand out, because every decision that we're making should be about how the domain is front and center on the stage. So, to conclude, the domain should be the primary focus of whatever we're doing. And we express that domain with models that help us solve our problems and add value to our organizations. If we say you have to focus on the domain, there's always still things in the peripheral vision if you focus. So maybe it's better to say ignore the non-essential and ignore the technical, because that way we prevent ourselves from still, doing the things that, although they are important, they're not necessarily helpful. So how can we do that best? Find our domain expert. It is essential to have someone that can help us in that process. If every decision should be in service of domain focus, then decisions are a rather important element of the way we are developing our architecture and our models. So maybe we should log our decisions in a non-boring format. And this, I think, is very important, because a lot of the decision-making formats that are out there, although they help you find the gaps in your reasoning or in your explanation of a particular decision, they are also incredibly boring to read. And we want to optimize this for the reading experience, because we want to look back at what we've done 6 months later and understand, that is how we got here. Because you're working in a complex domain, so your brain will certainly forget about a lot of the stuff. And if those decisions are so important, then we also really must clarify the goal of what we're trying to achieve, because only then we can really have something that we can use as a decision-making characteristic. If we know what we're trying to achieve, then every decision that we have to make, we can ask ourselves, is that really getting us one step closer to the goal, or are we moving further away from it? And that is very difficult because that pertains to strategy, and not all organizations have a very clearly defined strategy, but it's very, very important. So, it's also important that we do not get stuck in our approach of doing things right now, because that is valuable. Getting stuck in our approach how we approach things right now is difficult because, sorry, I'm going to move on. Because if I get to this, I'll pick back up. If we reflect often on what we're doing, then we know if we're on track. And we can see if there's things going on in our environment that we aren't addressing well. So, we might have an approach that works very well for us right now, but as things evolve, it is important that our process evolves with it. And that is what I mean when talking about our approach of doing things. We must be sensitive to how this affects the work that we're doing. So, reflect often, and what is often? That can be, the predefined moments that you already have in your existing process. Maybe you're doing Scrum and you have a retrospective after every sprint. But I would recommend to do is far more often. Every interaction that you have is an opportunity to learn about what went well and what we can do better the next time. And always lead with what went well, because that creates a positive narrative, but also be critical of where there's room for improvement. Domain-driven design principles should essentially be used to tackle complexity where it matters. And that is why I want you to put something in your calendar on Monday, and that is, what is your core domain? Because as long as you don't understand this, it is very difficult to make the right types of decisions. Because you might understand what your goal is, but if that core domain that you're working on is nowhere represented in your code base, then you might still be working on the wrong stuff for a very long time. One final note, this whole process isn't linear. And so I've told you a story, and it's linear by nature, but this is not necessarily how it's going to be on Monday. On Monday, opportunities will present themselves in a chaotic way. And that can be helpful, so my suggestion would be to even cultivate some chaos in your process, because in that process, we will learn a lot. We can use our creativity to deal with constraints and to learn a lot. So, my name is Marijn Huizendveld. I want to thank you for listening to me today.